Hello again. Welcome back to the Vaults Remastered. Today's episode is going to be talking about pitfalls of a homebrew campaign. What am I talking about? Well, you've gone ahead and created this awesome world with all these factions and NPCs, and you've got the main plot, and you got subplots, and you got subplots, and you've got your player characters and their backstories, and you got an open world. There's these locations they can go to. Great, right? All these awesome things that you've planned and spent weeks, maybe months, heck, maybe even years put together. But this creates problems. And that's what we're going to get into today. What are the top eight, not in any particular order or design from some sort of crazy poll or survey I put out, but just some things I ran into as I was plotting my own game world, my own first couple sessions. Let's take a look. Number one, overwhelming complexity. You've got all this information, right? All these factions, NPCs, the backstories, the lore. And then you're trying to get it to your players because why not, right? It's exciting, it's interesting, it's cool stuff you put together. You spend all this time on it. But your players can only handle so much at one time. You can't just dump pages and pages of lore at them. You can't just read 3 hours of narrative to them. You're not doing an audiobook. This is especially true if you've got players that are new to TTRPGs, they're new to your game, they don't know the rules, all that sort of stuff. You need to balance introducing these game elements with the rest of what they're trying to figure out, just rolling dice and making decisions so that you're not going to overwhelm the players. That's a key number one. Number two, balancing your faction representation. Just like you want to have your players sharing the spotlight on the stage during any session, your factions and the NPCs, they also need to share the stage. So having enough time for each one of them to get equal representation, equal narrative weight, screen time, that could be a big challenge. Because if you mess it up where you just present one side of the story, let's say, and in my campaign this is particularly true because I have this struggle between two opposing forces, chaos and order. And if you present just one side too much, it can create the illusion that that faction is more important, or that faction is the good guys, or they're the bad guys, and you don't have the other side of the story to balance it out. So you want to make sure if you're going to try to pull off this weight counterweights concept that you give each of your factions equal time to each other. Third one, moral ambiguity and maintaining it. In my world, again, I'm trying to create this struggle between two equal and opposite forces, and the player characters have the freedom to choose one or the other without deciding one side's good or one side's bad. And there's this fluid area of gray between the two. So this concept of moral ambiguity where, hey, who's the good guys, who's the bad guys, which side are we on, and which side should we be on, and are we the good guys, are we the bad guys, maintaining that that fog of war, if you will, is a real tough challenge in one of these complicated campaigns that you're trying to put together. And you don't want any one faction's motives to be so extreme or their methods so extreme that they immediately get identified as evil or good or whatever it is. So having that shroud over everything is super important, and I think that goes even not just to their actions, but to maybe what they're wearing or what their name of their faction is. I've been trying to do a really tough job of maintaining just neutral tones without being dull and boring on top of that. So that's a big challenge. Fourth, the dreaded player agency versus plot progression. You might also call this the open world versus railroading. There's a fine line here between those two endeavors, right? You want to give your players choices, you want to give them freedom to do things, but you also want them to stay on target. You want them to go after the golden goose there at the end, the prize. But at the same time, you can't just railroad them and say, my way or the highway. Otherwise, every time they come up with an idea, you're just shooting it down, and then it gets to the point of, well, why even bother coming up with ideas if the GM just keeps saying, no, you can't do that, or you have to do this, you have to do that. So how do you balance that without letting your game go off the rails and players are just doing whatever, whenever, wherever they want every single session, and it gets impossible to plan for. Number 5, Pitfall. In my game, this is going to be more specific, but you may have put something similar to your own homebrewed world. Mine, I'm using the Relic System from Pathfinder Second Edition. I believe it's I know it's in the GM Core. I forget the exact name of the page. It was also in the Game Mastery Guide before the remaster. But my concept was this: that my old world that I just ended, which was a 5th edition D&D world back in October, it was going to be not destroyed, but it was ending, and I wanted to maintain, or I wanted to create a bridge between that game, those characters that were no longer being played, and the new game that was restarting, and inject like a 6-month time frame between the events that ended that campaign. If you haven't seen my videos about remastering your game and blowing up your world, go ahead and take a look at those. That'll give you some more insight into what I'm talking about here. But what I wanted to do is create a bridge, and I was going to use the Relic System, and I am using the Relic System. So the relics are these personal items from the original players from the last game that have survived this cataclysmic set of events that triggered the rebirth of my campaign as a Pathfinder system game. And the idea was that these relics would tie into the story and tie into the characters themselves, and give them drive, give them focus. And I was even flirting with the idea of having it almost to help determine what class you would be, depending on which relic you obtained, or at least making it so that if you took this relic, the classes were, even if you chose a different class, your subclasses, whatever you want to call it, would be really tied into that. That, of course, maybe sounds cool on paper, but you can't be that heavy, handed with it either, because if it takes away choices for the players, and they're just being dictated to by these relics. Then it kind of gets more into you telling a novel story than them being able to do a collaborative effort. So I've been really careful to try to balance this concept, this cool idea of bridging my two game worlds, having these relics be meaningful, having them help direct the current plot, but not be the plot, not be the characters. So that's a fine line that I'm trying to walk here. 6, pacing and focus. If you've got all these factions and plots, subplots, and characters and backstories and the NPCs and locations, you've only got so much time to play each session, 3 hours, 4 hours, or whatever, how much time you're playing. You have to be able to maintain forward momentum. You have to be able to keep, the player's eye on the prize, as it were, and maintaining that at a friendly pace, shall we say. That's another trick. That's another tough hurdle. And again, if you're kind of just more linear, railroady, it's not as big of a deal. But if you have this sandbox, open world, interwoven plots, and they can kind of investigate different directions, and they can choose opposite sides of a particular plot, it makes it so that pacing and focus are going to get lost easily if you're not careful. Number 7 is your player engagement with the lore. Let's face it, you might have the greatest, coolest lore in the whole world, according to you. Some of your players might not care, right? They might not be interested in all the lore and all the deep lore, especially if they're really maybe just into the throwing the dice and combat, that kind of stuff. Or they might only care about the lore that specifically ties into their own character. So how do you balance that if you've got a lot of lore, a lot of clues and mystery and exploration for characters that are not, or players that aren't driven by that? And then conversely, you may have players that really love that sort of stuff and want more, and they want to spend more time investigating and researching. So balancing those two sides of the coin, that's super tricky, and you're trying to keep everybody engaged and everybody moving forward. How do you pull this off? And then the 8th and the final challenge to your awesome, beautiful homebrewed campaign world is interplayer conflict. And I don't mean the players themselves, the characters are, interparty conflict. The players' characters aren't PvP going at it. But if you're designing this morally ambiguous game world, this world where the choices determine what happens next, it's open like that, and things are tied into the backstories of the characters very tightly, and they can be on either side of a plot. What happens when the PCs come into conflict because of all these options, and one side decides to go left while the other side decides to go right, or they come and smash into each other? How do you handle that? What do you do? Managing that kind of dynamic, that is really essential to a game of this complexity if you're going this way. And you can see where this would lead to just natural, splitting the party, the cardinal sin of fantasy RPGs. So managing that sort of a challenge, that's another pitfall. So here we are. We're talking about 8 things that can derail your awesome, cool campaign world that you just designed. How do you go about easing the risk of this, mitigating it, mitigation? How can you steer your campaign towards a fulfilling ending that's everybody's excited about? It's memorable, good times, right? What are some ideas? What are some strategies for that? Here's where I relied a bit upon Pathfinder's rule book for this. Now, some of these things, again, they're going to apply no matter what game system you're using. But for the Pathfinder 2e viewers out there, those who are my target audience, I've got some specific strategies from either the rule book or just I'm using in my own game to kind of share with you with that. So let's take a look. First one, this probably goes without saying. I think everybody does this these days. That's just the idea of the session zero, right? If you're going to come up with some complex game where choices really matter, character backstories really matter, player characters can be on either side of a conflict, and there is no good guy, bad guy. There's no clear, BBEG, that sort of thing. And the players themselves could end up being the bad guys, at least in the eyes of the other factions. You need to set this out there, session zero. This is what the game is about. This is the theme of the game: order versus chaos. Which side wins depends on what you players choose, and make sure everybody's down with that. If they're not, then you either don't run this type of campaign or you find a different player. Now, as far as a Pathfinder example of this, or a strategy, I'm using this in my game. That's the level 0 character idea. This is in the GM core on page 84. With this concept, this variant rule, you start with level 0 characters, so they don't have a class. They don't have worry about all the feats and things that would be with a level 1 character. They're level 0. They are, in my game, they're refugees. They are part of a group of just civilians who are trying to escape the cataclysmic events that were triggered by my previous campaign. And 6 months later, they are on the move, trying to move through the vaults, which is by subterranean game world, is Darklands equivalent. And they're trying to go deeper, looking for safety, looking for security, looking for the mythological city of Savanthi, where supposedly they can find security, that sort of thing. So by doing something like this, I can cut out half of the rule kind of stuff that gets people confused as it is, because most of my players are new to Pathfinder. I'm pretty new to it myself, so we don't know all the rules and the mechanics for the game system as it is. And then if you take that and throw in your complex plot and NPCs and factions, you're just asking for just an overwhelming experience in the first few sessions, and that can chase a lot of people off. So I opted for the level 0. All my players need to worry about is their character's ancestry and background. That's it. Right? There's going to be some combat, but you're going to need to throw a fist, or you might, grab somebody's dagger that you find. Okay, if there's not a bunch of spells and all this other stuff you have to worry about. So level 0 characters, I think it's a great way to kind of get a complex campaign started, just to get people used to the game rules, 3-action economy, that sort of thing. All right, what's another strategy that I'm using, or you could use? Looking for player feedback, of course. You want to check in with your players, find out if they're having fun, right? Otherwise, you're wasting your time. Now, the problem with this, of course, is most players aren't just going to straight up give you honest feedback. It's, what do you do? Give them a poll or a survey and fill out this form and let me know. They're probably not going to give you honest feedback. They're probably going to say everything's great, right? But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. And I think the three things I'm listing here are ways you can pull it off without making it seem like you're specifically asking for feedback. One is, and this isn't specific to Pathfinder, and this is any game. Most games you got players or two or three, whatever, who are taking notes. Ask them to post it. I'm using Discord for this, so my player characters, my players, can post a record of what their character saw, heard, whatever, session log, party notes, whatever. This has shown me at least some people are engaged. They're engaged enough that they've taken notes in the first place. They're engaged enough to then share the information. That hopefully will then inspire the other members of their party to at least read it or post their own or, clarify some things. We can refer to them before a game session starts. And just it gives me then a way to check and see, are they getting it, as I read over the notes and see if, wow, they thought a totally different thing. They never got the whole plan, the plot that I put together. Then a couple of the other options or strategies you can use, and these come out of the Game Master's or GM Core, page 16 specifically. And there's an entry in there about just listening to your players. And the context is this, and how this ties into player feedback, is that as you're playing your game, you're going to run into rules or situations or things that you don't know the answer right away, or you have some ambiguous interpretations. Rather than always having to decide everything yourself, why not share that with the players? Listen to what their opinions are. So if you run into some sort of game rule confusion, you can ask, Joe over here to go look it up, or hey, guys, I think this is the situation. What do you think? And help them adjudicate, or get them to help you adjudicate. If they're interested and they're involved, they're going to want to help you with this. Uh, the more you involve them with this sort of process, then the more they're able to give you feedback. Well, hey, the way we're doing that, I think it's not fair. Okay. Especially if you're doing homebrew ancestries or classes, stuff like that. You have players playing some of your homebrew stuff. Like I've got a whole bunch of ancestries. Almost all my ancestries are homebrew. I'm definitely listening to them. Well, hey, what'd you think about that feat that I put it together? Maybe it sucks, maybe it's great, or maybe it's OP, and we can talk about it. Then the other thing here, the last one again, Game Master's Guide, the GM Core is its new remastered name. Reviewing, right? At the end of your sessions, you're looking over your notes, look at what decisions were made, what interpretations you made, especially if they were, kind of game altering. Somebody died or something horrible happened, or the path that the players go on, like derails. Go back and look at that stuff and see what decisions were made. And you may find that you made the wrong call. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just go and share that with your players. Hey guys, I messed up. I want to retcon that scenario. I did the rule wrong. My interpretation was wrong. Let's start the game next time and, fix that, whatever. And that's going to help your players understand that, you're looking for their feedback. You're not just like too bad, so sad type of idea. All right, what's another mitigation strategy we can use is flexible storytelling. And it's one of these ones that's maybe obvious, but if you think about it, maybe it isn't. This is where, especially in an open world, you've got multiple storylines possible. You got all this backstories from the characters and all these different factions and stuff. You got to be ready for your plot to go in directions you didn't expect, based upon the player's actions and decisions. And so you want to be able to go with the flow. You want to be flexible with this and not be like, no, you can't do that. If you are able to be flexible, then you're going to help your players, have their own agency. You're respecting that. And if you have a very intricate story, but it's, instead of it being knotted tight, all these different threads, leave them loose so that you can move things around as needed. You should have more than enough lore and material from your really complicated, intricate story that you can easily move things around as players make decisions. You got stuff to pull from and plug in as you go. Then with the GM's core here on page 14, they had an idea here about off-session gaming. And I've done this a couple of times, but as a regular occurrence, this is an interesting idea where you purpose to try to find an opportunity to expand your game outside of the normal session. This way you can kind of keep it on those rails during the game session, but then allow the players to explore things outside of the normal game. I've used this for like downtime type of stuff or crafting, and I can see doing it more where you have a regular session perhaps with one player a week or something like that, or if somebody misses a game, you're able to go in and explore some of the stuff that their specific character and their backstory is interested in. And so you can go over little mini missions, maybe some crafting activities, some research stuff, things that are going to be shared with the other players later, or maybe something that empowers the team later because they've helped case out a place in the off session. And so then when the game starts, their rogue is coming up saying, "Hey, I already know the secret way in, secret way out," type of thing. You've got all kinds of options like that that you can use for these off-session games to get players more involved, to hit some of these backstories that you weren't able to get in during your normal game session, and generate some more lore, or share some more lore, generate some more opportunities to share the lore, and then those players can then share it, of course, with their teammates. All right, then the other big one here, mitigating factor there, or mitigating strategy, is focusing on your characters. Don't worry so much about your plot, and like everything's got to go A, B, C, D. Look at the player characters. Look at their backstories. They wrote you backstories for a reason. Use them. There's plenty of information there. Even if it's the terrible backstory, there might be a name in there. There might be just a brief couple bullets that are useful, and you can use them to create little touch points, if you will, during a game session. So, I mean, players will get excited if during the game they might be exploring a dungeon, but maybe some NPC that they bust out of some jail cell or something like that happens to know their long lost sister who disappeared in the jungle 6 years ago, and that player character has that part of their backstory. And oh, hey, you look like this girl I saw, Jungle Jenny or something like that. You can come up with some little story, elements like that to drop in there. That'll help your characters to be more, or the players more engaged, more like, ooh, cool, I want to find out more because maybe this guy knows something, or maybe there's more people in this dungeon that'll help me learn even more stuff. For me, when I'm doing Pathfinder wise, as I mentioned, was using the Relic System, which is the idea that there are these magical items tied into my previous game world, my previous player characters, and the current player characters have acquired them, and they're going to use them or I'm using them as a lore device so I can bring out history of the game more easily as the players, acclimate or attune, I guess, to these items. But they're also magical, where the players can use them to empower and craft and give more, special abilities to. The Relic System is on page 96 of the GM core. So if you're interested in something like that, go check it out. They're customizable, homemade type of magic items. You don't need to, look at the treasure vault or whatever to get, items from that. You can create your own, and they can be very story focused, character, tied together. Another thing they talk about on page 66 of the GM core, that's the downtime. Downtime's a big chunk, or the big third element, if you will, for Pathfinder. You got your encounter mode, combat, that sort of thing. You got exploration, looking around, investigating clues, that kind of thing, tracking. And then you got downtime, that, slower pace where you're back in the village, back in the town, back in the camp, whatever it is, and the players can do stuff. Don't just necessarily blow off downtime. You can use that to explore things like players' long-term goals. One way to get more of your story out there, more of this lore shared, more player involvement, more backstory exploration, is ask each of your players, what's the long-term goal of your character? I mean, what do they want to do? In the end, is it design the greatest sword that was ever made? Okay, well, that could be some downtime activity. Is it to research some new spell or whatever? Or is it to create a start a business, a leather tanning business? I don't know. Is it to get involved in the politics of the village, start a gambling casino? Who knows, right? It could be all kinds of things they want to do. That'll help generate income, that kind of stuff, or explore the game world, get more information, track down clues, that sort of thing. And you can use this as a great opportunity to just take your huge complicated world and start injecting more and more of it to your players, outside of the, battling the swords and shields clashing in the middle of a fight. So you could definitely take advantage of that. Another thing that Pathfinder throws in there is on page 204 GM Core as well. They have a leadership system they discuss. And so if you really want to get your players into, or they want to get into building organizations and that sort of thing, there's a whole, I think it's like a point system where they can build up whatever it is they're trying to create this as a leader of an organization. And there's rules for that they can dive into. That's another fun thing you can bring into Downtime. And the organizations or whatever they're creating, they can interact with those factions you've been creating. They can interact with those NPCs that you've created. The organizations they create might be the targets of some of your plots. They can involve those plots. They might need to get information or resources from some other group out there that can then expose them to more of your story. So lots of cool stuff like that if you focus on the characters and what they want. And last but not least, mitigation strategy, probably maybe the most important one if you think about it. It's introducing the elements, all this different stuff that you want to do in your game, all that lore, all those NPCs, all those plots, leadership system, relics, whatever it is, in a modular fashion, right? So little dollops at a time. And in order to do this correctly, you want to get a gauge of how much time you have. Because if you're going to have only a one shot, well, then you can't introduce 50 things. You just don't have the time for it. You maybe introduce one or two. But if you got a 2-3 year long epic campaign you're planning, you've got plenty of time to introduce all the stuff that you're hoping to do, just spacing it out, week to week, month to month, that sort of thing. So on page 64 in the GM Core, again, they've got breakdown of campaign lengths, and I just excerpted the brief campaign here. So this is an example of you're planning on playing with a group of people for 3 months, 6 months, somewhere in that range, once a week, once every other week. My games run bi-weekly, so we're running every other Tuesday, every other Thursday, my two different games. So you can sit here and budget out roughly what they're talking about here. In that time frame, you can fit in 2 adventures. An adventure, the way I would define that is it's a string of sessions that all has a story arc, a plot line, beginning, middle, end type of thing. You can have 2 of these over that 3 to 6 month period, depending on how often you're playing. You might have a dungeon crawl thrown in there. You might have a go rescue the princess from the tower, the wizard's tower, right? You can do stuff like that in that 6 month time frame. Have some fun with it, and how many sessions you have. You know how much time it's going to take roughly. You know how many adventures you're looking at. So in this example, if I know I'm going to have only about time for 2 adventures, I can really only unveil 2 of my plots. Even though I have 8, I know I'm only going to be able to get through 2 at most. Might only be 1, depending on if I'm going in both directions with my plot. So anyway, that is the last mitigation strategy I wanted to share with you that I'm trying to use in my own campaign that I've created. So that kind of leaves us with final thoughts, wrapping this up. So here are the big things. Pacing is huge with a complex plot, campaign world that you've put together. You want to make sure your story is constantly moving forward. Combat, exploration, role playing, all these different sessions you can hopscotch and plug and play them as you go, just to keep giving a little bit of variety, making sure each one of them though contributes towards that plot, moving things forward. Player agency, that's another huge important thing with your complicated campaign you're running. Make sure you leave room for your players to innovate, to be creative, to influence your game, to steer the ship. Your story should be designed to be flexible enough to fit that. And I think actually that a complex campaign world actually does allow for this, because you can create enough complexity to be flexible to fit just about any one of your players' interests. Third thing here, your NPCs and factions, you want to make sure that these groups you're creating, these people you're creating, they're interesting. They have key tie-ins to your story. They're going to be contacts. They're going to be adversaries. They're going to be allies. They're going to interact with your PCs, and through them, that's how most of your lore is actually going to be communicated. You're not going to have a lot of lore communicated just by happenstance, where the player opens a book and reads a chapter, or they see some weird carvings on the side of a temple or something like that. Most of the lore dumping is going to come through NPC interactions, faction interactions. So make sure that these factions are aligning with your story, that they contain the lore, they have the knowledge of it, and then make them interesting enough that the PCs want to go talk to them. Your dynamic world's another big thing to make sure you're focusing in on. The world should reflect what your PCs are doing, right? If your PCs have no effect on the world, then what was the point of the game? Okay. If a group of heroes or whatever, villains and your PCs, whoever they are, they aid or help a group, what happens? What's the effects of that? If they go and kill some leader of some group or some important NPC, what happens? What's the domino effects of these things? The world should shift and move with their actions to make it alive. And again, that's going to allow you to, if they knock off one of your big bad evil guys, well, guess what? You got 7 more lined up behind them. Ha ha ha. Last one, foreshadowing plot twists. Make sure in those early sessions that you're planting your seeds. You're giving those clues. You don't lore dump, but you can name drop, right? You can give little symbols. You can give little clues. For me, I'm using the relics a bit for this in my game. They're discover the relics in the first session, and the relics are giving them some vibes, giving them some special ability type of thing. And then the 2 factions that they interacted with so far both wanted those relics as well. So there's something about these relics that is important to the game. So the players are going to want to pursue that now. They also use the relics to learn about a couple of factions, a little bit of information. They got some symbols, they got some lore out of this. They've got a direction that they're moving now. So that sort of foreshadowing, that sort of just seed dropping, that's super important. It's going to keep your players engaged. They're going to want to know what's going on. They're going to want to know what's next. They're going to want to go ahead and see where's this thing going. And then you throw in those little twists to really throw them off instead of it going, oh yeah, we're just going to go and learn. We're going to read a book about this thing. Like, no, maybe next session somebody comes and knocks them out and steals the relic. Take that. All right, there you go. That is the end of the vid. So hopefully this was interesting, some useful information for you. If you liked it, go ahead and click the like button. If you want to hear more, subscribe to the channel. If you got some ideas, your own final thoughts, or you have your own experiences, your own suggestions, go ahead and put a comment down in the comment box. Whatever it is that you're wanting to help show some support, some love this way. In the meantime, go ahead and take care of yourself. Have yourselves a good new year, and peace out.